If you've played any medic in TF2 within the last 10 years, chances are you're already very familiar with these two weapons, the Ubersaw and the Crusader's Crossbow. It's almost unanimously agreed upon that these two weapons completely trounce every other alternative. The Ubersaw's 25% Uber gain on hit with a basically non-existent downside already makes it a very powerful weapon, let alone how mediocre every other medic melee weapon is. The Crusader's Crossbow is in a similar situation, in which its ability to heal teammates from afar and heal very quickly completely negates any downside it has. And again, the alternatives are a bit of a joke. This puts Medic in a tough spot in which more than half of his weapons are almost always straight downgrades. While some may argue that melee weapons other than the Ubersaw have their uses, you'd be hard-pressed to find anyone arguing for the usage of anything besides the Crusaders. In summary, the Crusader's Crossbow is a medic weapon which shoots bolts that heals teammates or damages enemies based on how far away the target is. The farther away, the higher the healing or the damage. I'll go into them more in a moment, but for now, all you need to know is that this weapon is miles better than almost any other medic primary, and almost everybody agrees on that. Normally when this is the case, many suggest a nerf to a weapon, since it's easier to make one weapon weaker than 3 other weapons stronger, right? Well, think about it like this. A weapon is normally only nerfed if it's defined as overpowered. And an important question to consider is this. Do people think the crossbow is overpowered because its effectiveness in-game far exceeds what is reasonable? Or because the other medic primaries aren't as useful as the crossbow is? Speaking of the other medic primaries, they suck. Well, mostly. The overdose is bad because its abilities are rarely ever useful. The speed boost only applies when you hold the weapon out, and chances are that if you have the Uber charge to create that speed boost in the first place, you should only really have your medigun out to keep your team buffed and ready for an Uber charge. The Syringe Gun sucks because it's basically just an overdose without the speed boost. The 10% more damage results in a single point more of damage per syringe, which in simpler terms, makes no difference. And the Blutsauger isn't actually too terrible. Its healing can save you here and there if you're being chased down, but its usefulness entirely relies on your teammates not properly protecting you. Meaning that if your team cares at all about you as a medic, it's likely equipping this thing will only result in your self-healing being crippled. That alongside syringes being an unreliable source of damage makes it an weapon at best. In comparison to these three, the Crusader's Crossbow is just so much more useful in so many more situations that are way more common. Sure, you may have gotten 1 or 2 kills with the Blutsauger, but the usefulness of the crossbow in literally every situation can't be argued with. Generally speaking, the more situations in which a weapon is useful, the better that weapon is considered to be. Take the Power Jack for example. It's one of the most used pyro melee weapons because its ability to go faster is useful in so many scenarios. As for the crossbow though, not only is it incredibly useful, but it's also really cool and fun to use. The feeling on landing a crossbow bolt in your teammate to save them just in time,
nice.
Or the satisfaction of taking out an enemy sniper who's been harassing your team for the last 10 minutes. It feels really good. Compare that to and my next point becomes clear. One of the best parts of TF2 is that doing things and shooting your guns feels really good. The scatterguns, shotguns, knives, rocket launchers. Killing enemies and doing things with these weapons is really fun, and the Crusader's Crossbow brings that fun to the medic. Alongside that fun, it raises his skill ceiling a ton. The biggest reason that I think the Crusader's is balanced is because of how much skill it takes to use effectively. While a pub medic may struggle a lot to make full use of the weapon's abilities, top level medics can pull off super clutch plays and create hype moments that just wouldn't be possible otherwise. When you're using this thing and you see a teammate way off in the distance who's in danger, it can be intense. Hitting enemies with your weapons can already be difficult sometimes, but hitting a teammate consistently with a crossbow is surprisingly way harder. Explaining why this is pretty complex, but it's important, so bear with me here. Normally, aiming at a player is pretty simple. The enemy tries to dodge you, and you try to compensate for that with your aiming. Very much an oversimplification, but the important part to consider here is that there's just one target you need to focus on to figure things out. When using the Crusader's Crossbow, however, things get pretty complicated. Let's say I'm trying to hit this teammate who's fighting the enemy. That teammate's movements are primarily dependent on how the enemy they're fighting is choosing to attack them. This means that in order to hit teammates consistently with a crossbow, you need to both analyze the enemy team members and their attacks, as well as your own teammate and the way they're responding to the enemy's attacks. But wait, there's another way for the Crusaders to be used effectively in a firefight.
On heavy. Okay, they're down 3.
Can I get an arrow?
Oh, yeah.
Effective team communication is something that can greatly increase the overall effectiveness of the crossbow. While obviously strong team communication is always useful, the crossbow is a pretty exceptional case. This means that this one weapon not only increases the skill ceiling of the medic, but the skill ceiling of his team as a whole. The TLDR of all this is that the Crusader's crossbow is awesome. All of this is to say that despite how much better it is than any other medic primary, I don't think the crossbow should be nerfed. At least, not the healing part. Nerfing it would severely limit the rewards for being more skilled as an individual and also as a team. This is sometimes referred to as lame. The way I like to look at this whole situation is this. Would you rather bring a really cool and skill-based weapon closer to the mediocrity and general meh-ness of other weapons? Or bring those lesser weapons up, making them more useful and fun to use? Although, as much as I am on board with that idea, things aren't quite as clear-cut as I'd like it to be. Making the other syringe guns just as good as the crossbow can only be done in so many ways, if there is a way at all. The main reason for this video's title is that despite all I've said, I don't think there is a clear solution to this. On one hand, the Crusader's crossbow is a revolutionary item that greatly rewards skill and team play with crazy healing, while also being incredibly fun and satisfying to use. On the other hand though, there are 3 other entire weapons that some would argue are completely invalidated due to how good the crossbow is in the objective and subjective sense. Now, if I were an employee at Valve, I'd have no idea what to do. The situation is the definition of a rock in a hard place, really. I mean, you got one really cool weapon that does like a lot of crazy stuff, then you got one that like, oh, you run a little faster, and then you got another